And now for something completely different.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi. Welcome to the future.
But no. Remember, no guts, no galaxy.
Welcome to the No Guts, No Galaxy podcast number 166. We are your hosts, Darren and Phil. Today is Tuesday, August 14th, 2018. And I'd like to say welcome to all of you listeners out there. And to you, Mama Bear. How you doing, Darren?
Good. It is time for another podcast. Obviously, we just had the recent podcast about balance and gameplay with Chris and Paul. We have Paul joining us again today. And a lot of people out there know this podcast is coming. This one's all about faction warfare. And there's already a huge thread going on about this. Paul, did you start that thread? How did this thread come into existence before this podcast? And welcome, Paul.
Hi. This thread spawned from a discussion that we were having about doing this podcast, because we're talking about the Balance podcast, saying that we're going to do a faction play podcast. And what happened was that Just Call Me Ash created a thread talking about it. So I decided, normally we want to release a podcast and then start getting feedback from what was said. But because the discussion had already started and there are some really good points being brought up there, I thought I'd just jump in and just say, okay, great. If you guys want to have the conversation, let's have the conversation here. But remember, the podcast is still coming, but then I'm going to correlate notes that are in this current discussion and add it to the podcast. So that's what we're doing today.
Excellent. So I have in front of me two different sets of notes. Obviously, we went through the discussion, the thread that's already on there that you were just discussing. And thank you, Ash, for getting that going. And everybody else that participated. We appreciate that. So we have a bunch of bullet points, things that were brought up multiple times, basically the stuff that was brought up most often. And then we have some other information here, Paul, and that's from you, correct?
Yeah, before we started the whole thing, is about, I'd say 4 months ago, we started doing the investigation into what is the next thing we're going to work on. And this is following Solaris. And we were discussing, what can we do here, or here? But the overwhelming notion was that faction play needs to be refreshed. Basically, it has to get some life breathed back into it. And the big thing is that we wanted to make sure that we're not going to overload resources here in the studio. But at the same time, it's we do know that we have to make some sort of significant movement on what is currently out there. Now, that being said, I started working with the current system that we currently have. And like I mentioned, it's that we removed a lot of the penalties and the taxation, essentially, of faction play. So players were allowed to easily move back and forth between factions to participate in whatever kind of events were supposed to come down the pipeline. But now that they're playing out, people can see how this system works. Now, I'd like to take that a little bit further, right? And I'll explain that later on, is that it's using the current system, but not diluting. It's using the current system to get as much depth as possible, right, without having to re-engineer massive parts of faction play.
I feel like we're trying to achieve two things. On one hand, we're trying to simplify things and consolidate, but on the other hand, also trying to add some flavor and so forth. It's a challenge to do both at the same time. But obviously, it's what we're trying to do here. Do you want to start us off with something? Do we want to save addressing the community points maybe till the end? And first, do you want to kind of take us down the path of the things that you are able to do and know that are going to be coming down the pipeline?
Well, every time I write a design doc, I write a quick little blurb at the very top of it, just saying the overview and what the impact of what the feature set's supposed to do, right? And maybe I could just read that.
Absolutely, that would be awesome.
So I will say 1, period, overview, period. No. Faction play has been running for a little over 4 years since this last major iteration. Now, faction play has been running for more than 4 years, but
since its last iteration, yes.
Yeah, big change. Recently, we removed all penalty systems from faction play in terms of players switching their alignment and loyalty to various factions. This has proven to be a net positive in the eyes of the players, and this proposed update builds on that change. Now, when I say a net positive, I'm not saying it's like, oh my god, this is the best thing ever. I know there's still people out there who think switching factions is not ideal, right? Because it breaks down the whole idea of the loyalist path. But
Right.
I'll touch on that here in a second.
You're saying it's not a gross positive.
Yes, it's not a
absolutely.
black and white thing.
Right.
Right. It's leaning towards a light gray rather than towards black.
Right.
The intent of this update is to give more to the players as to what the Inner Sphere battle is about, and the localized battles filled with story and decisions that faction play should contain. It's also intended not to tax current MWO resources in terms of engineering and development time, right? So this is my way of saying it's like without having to rewrite major systems, this new feature is meant to bring more story, more reasons why you would select the different career paths in faction play, and to really breathe life into the story, lore, and loyalist pathways.
As much as possible, right? And one thing I've seen consistently from the community is any amount of lore, just a little bit, usually, at least by a certain subset of our player base, is highly appreciated. And what you're touching on is the challenges of, obviously, we've got a limited size team. We've got multiple projects going on with MechWarrior 5 and MWO, and then within MWO, you got multiple sections. You got, the obviously Solaris, faction warfare, and regular queues, and so you've got a lot of different areas where development needs to be addressed and continued. And so it's not, we have to be realistic in our expectations, but there are things, as you're saying, within our current abilities that can be worked on. So let's kick that off.
So one of the things is that this document has already gone through a tech review, which is where the engineers look at it and say, yeah, this is possible. No, that's not possible. And it's been called to a point of this is what we can roll with for the feature release. Now, because this document was written a while ago, and because it's already gone through tech review, yes, we can do all this stuff. Yes, we can put it into a patch somewhere down the road. But it was really important and brought to the table for everybody who was discussing internally here was to make sure that we got community feedback on it. And that's where the thread from Ash is helping this out. Now, the intent was to have the doc written, podcast created, talk about the doc, and then get feedback, and then just start adding to the doc what we can. In this case, doc was written, feedback was given, and then
the community took off with the thread.
Yeah, but it's not a bad thing because it did create this giant list, significant list that I have here in front of us, right?
The other list, which is, and the system can still work the way we want. I mean, obviously we have a little bit of head start with community feedback, but now the community can give some feedback directly on what you say today. So there'll be plenty of feedback.
So starting off, we have adding lore and story to conflicts. Now, this is one of the biggest feedback things I've been seeing continuously throughout all of faction play community warfare's history is more lore. There was a time where Alex Gardner and myself, we would do little things using the Inner Sphere communications intercepts, right? And people were loving it. It's just that we had no time to continue with that stuff, right?
Yeah. Now you're the lead designer, and I do want to, because we've talked about this before in previous podcasts. I mean, a lot. Can I say the majority of the lore stuff, and I'm not talking about backbone game stuff, but the flavor and the little things that have happened time to time over the years. The majority of it's been you, right? Like you've yeah. I thought so.
Basically, all that little stuff. Like even when we were releasing the Blood Asp and all that stuff, little leaked documents and stuff like that, right? That's
teases and leaks. That's you.
That's just because I gotta go. Come on, let's put something behind it. Let's get people excited. Let's start
Nerd.
rumors. right?
Nerd.
Nerd.
Oh, nerd. Oh, no.
But it's such a good thing.
You guys don't understand me. Don't tell me.
No, but you know what, and you're right, and I totally appreciate it as well. Obviously, we have a lot of history, lore to work from, and I can understand people wanting a little bit of that flavor in the game. And recently, with the events that Matt's been doing, I think those have gone over really well as far as faction warfare goes, and people want to see more of it. I understand that.
Yep. But the thing is, like, I'm a firm believer of getting a lot more of that in front of people.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, yeah, I get it. There's some people who just want to get in and smash mechs and they don't care about lore, right?
Sure.
But there's a large population out there who wants to see the lore behind it. Why are you fighting, right? What's
Yeah.
the net gain that you're going to get from participating? And I want to also start making a little bit more story driven. So it's not just here's an event, here's the blurb of why, and that's it.
Right.
Right. I want to see consequences. I want to see follow up, continuation, just basically making it kind of like be campaign driven rather than just here's some marketing events for you.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that makes it more meaningful for the players, and that's a key word that I've heard quite a few times as well.
Yeah, and this is what brings up certain little aspects of what the community is requesting and what's in the document. Now, what's in the document are things like just engineering touch points. There are things like I need a branching system that says if this condition is met, then this happens. If it fails, then that happens, right? That's actually quite a significant engineering change, and that's part of the driving factor of what this document is about, the design doc that I have. That brings into play the engineers are like, okay, yeah, we can do that, but it's going to take quite a bit of time, and here's the stuff they got to do. Now, people from the community is being requesting is like, can we have it so that the event system kind of leads, like breadcrumbs us through the campaigns,
Right.
and that's what this system is actually being put into place for. So yes, even though you suggested is like, can we have this breadcrumbing system? Yes, it's coming into the game, right? Through nature of this kind of globalized umbrella document. And we just want to make sure that people understand is like, just because we don't use the exact terminology that you're using, it doesn't mean that that isn't taken into consideration.
Sure.
Right. So
now you're saying that the ability to do all this is already essentially laid out, right? Like,
correct.
And the events that Matt has done recently are based on that. So it's
kind of event. Matt is using the marketing event tool,
okay,
right, which is not meant for this kind of stuff, and that's what I've written up is how to rewrite that event tool to allow a lot more in-depth and a lot more, I guess, granular tracking of information or win conditions, that kind of thing. Because what Matt has right now is like he can put team 1 versus team 2, and here's the win condition, right? The win condition,
and then it's over.
Is the tug of war system, or it's just some weird little trigger that kicks off. What I need are things like, well, it's not about win conditions. It could be things like, okay, I need skirmish to run for 8 hours. And at the end of 8 hours, whatever team hits 100 wins, right? And when I say team, I'm actually talking factions, but in the code side of things, it's just team one, team 2. Let's try to use factions properly. If faction A wins, right, 100 matches within that 8-hour window, it's going to next kick off this other event that says, okay, because you won this one, this is what the result is, and this is what's happening next.
Which hypothetically could be different from what happens if Team B wins?
Yes. Right.
Cool.
Now, for example, when I was doing this document and trying to work with some of the other people who are kind of working with this system, is that I clicked on a planet, found out the name of it, found out the name of the ruling leader, and I said, you know what? We're going to do something really cheesy, but at the same time, just to show you an example of what we can do, is that this leader's daughter gets kidnapped by the opposing faction. Now, it's going to give you this flavor text. Tells you what the circumstances were, who it was, what's happening, what tensions are rising. And as a player, you will choose, well, I'm going to fight for faction A, the faction that the, I don't know, daughter was kidnapped from.
That sounds like an inner sphere thing for sure.
Yeah, definitely, right? But
Yep.
it's saying that, okay, I'm going to participate with faction A because I want to help get that princess back.
Save the princess.
Okay, I use the princess name.
Is this a Mario? Is this Mario?
Well, the thing is, the other choice is like, no, we're going to keep her and we're going to hold her hostage and we're going to demand this, this, and this, right? Well, the thing is, if faction A wins, right, you rescue the daughter or the princess, and you start saying, okay, what you guys, what faction B did was not tolerable. So what we're going to do is attack them, right? So this is the consequence of that first action. It continues the storyline, moves forward. If faction B won that 8-hour segment, right? Faction B is like, we won, but here's our conditions now. You guys are going to surrender this city, right? And that's what the next event is, surrender of the city. Now, you can sit there going, BS, I am not going to let this city fall to those guys, so I'm going to fight for faction A again. Or faction B is like saying, you know what, it's time to lay the smack down, so we're going to go and just eradicate their defense forces around the main palace, whatever.
I love this,
right?
Paul. This is reminding me of like when I used to read Choose Your Own Adventure books and so forth. And
well, it essentially is, right?
yeah, it is essentially. But what I love about this is that I mean, I know that there's some work here, there's some engineering time and so forth, but it seems like such a little thing that to the people that it will matter to, it will make a huge difference. They're going to like, I'm loving the way this sounds already.
Well, the thing is, it's not just a story too. It can also be based on rewards.
Sure.
Right. So there's little things we can give out, like items we can give out, right? Notation items, and I call them notation items. They're just basically like a decal or a cockpit item that says you participated in this specific event.
You mean
and all I got was this
right.
damn T-shirt or whatever?
Exactly. The princess is in another castle.
You mean? I just want to clarify. You meant decal, right?
Well,
okay.
I guess I can pronounce it like you Americans, right?
Stickers.
The rest of the world.
Mech stickers. Okay, so so I love this. I feel like this is a great example of something that can take, that's a little bit of work, that's not changing, insane mechanics, but will add, like I said, meaning for a lot of players. There will be still those players that just, I don't care, I just want to get in and shoot stuff. But for those of us that appreciate that, and I definitely include myself in that, this sounds very exciting.
Yep. And here's the thing, too, is that a long time ago, I asked Randall Bills for a chart. It's basically a matrix of all the factions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, if faction A kills a player from faction B, what would their thoughts be on you? So faction A would be like, yeah, you did awesome. You killed one of those guys. Faction B was like, you killed one of our guys. We hate you. And it's this matrix that says, okay, let's talk about Steiner Davian with their little alliance that they had going on.
Mm-hmm.
Steiner, you're playing as Steiner. You kill somebody from Merrick. Steiner's going to go, yeah, that's awesome. Merrick's going to go, you suck. We hate you. Davian is going to go, that was kind of cool, right? So it's not like Davian is going to sit there going, we hate you, or yay, you did something. But they are going to be kind of neutral. But they're going to be kind of behind your back because of that alliance.
Yeah, what you're saying,
right?
Obviously, is that we're talking about the Federated Commonwealth, and even though it's it is together as one, that's in a lot of ways, it's only on the surface. There's obviously still the split between the Davian and the Steiner belief systems, or the things that they like or dislike. Yeah,
exactly. And because what we can do is add a faction rating for every single player.
Oh, nice.
Is that you can participate in any faction conflict, right? like if I'm Cretan and I help Merrick in that Steiner Merrick fight, right? I'm gonna get a little bit of Merrick backing as well, right? Plus, Karita's gonna sit there going, "You helped one of our
Yes.
friendly neighbors, right? They're not allies, but just a friendly neighbor. And because you did that, we're going to give you some loyalty for that."
So it's basically a reputation system.
Yep. Within all the factions.
Which
right?
is crazy because there's a lot of factions and their interplay between each other. There's what's on the surface sometimes. This is, people always call Battletech and MechWarrior kind of Game of Thrones in space. But there's the what's on the surface and there's what's underneath. And yeah, that does seem like it's going to take a little time to put together because...
well, the thing is, we kind of already have it.
Oh, nice.
Right? It's like we do track on a per user basis what the factions think of you. But the thing is right now it's based on one faction liking you and you climbing up that line.
Right.
Now, this is where the whole loyalist thing can come into play. Is that you're a loyalist, you will always fight for, let's say, Davian.
Right.
Right. And because you fight in all Davian conflicts, you're getting like loyalty points going up your tree, getting the ranks, getting rewards, right? Getting the notoriety. But at the same time, right now, Karita doesn't care about that. However, with this new system, Karita's going to start hating on you just because of the fact that you're just focused purely on these Davian conflicts.
Gotcha.
But if you have something like clan versus inner sphere conflict, and it's between what is that, Ghost Bear and Karita, I think they border. In that case, if you're anyone on inner sphere side, so I'm Davian, I go help Karita defend that planet. Davian's going to give me loyalty points. Karita's going to give me a little bit of loyalty points, right? And Ghost Bear is going to say, "Screw you, you're an idiot," and just start removing any sort of loyalty from them.
Now, in any given event, at the end of the event, is would every loyalty rating be affected, or only specific ones for each event?
Anything involved, right? Like if it makes sense based on lore and the history of BattleTech, then it'll get moved around in that manner. Now, one thing is that I got to get Randall to update this to include the new factions that we added, like Diamond Shark and all that.
Sure.
Right. But that's not a big issue. And we can just start tracking on a per faction base and start playing with this system. Now, it's not a huge thing for loyalists, but at the same time, it's a way of saying if you stick to one faction, you're going to start climbing that tree a lot faster. And at the same time is that we're going to be expanding on how many loyalist ranks there are. And I know, like right now, there's the general top rank,
which is 20, right?
Yeah, rank 20. We can go beyond that and start adding some extra bigger rewards, right? Because it's a long grind, right? A lot of people are there already.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people bringing that up in the thread, obviously.
Yep. So
they wanted to either go past the number, or I think some people put forward just starting over because they wanted the grind still.
But the thing is, now I'm open for this, and I have not laid down the law saying no, this is not going to happen. I'm just not a big fan of the whole what's that called in Call of Duty when you reset back to 0.
You don't want to ask me any Call of Duty questions.
Oh, you're talking about
Elite or something like that?
No. Oh, it's right there. No. It's like mastery, if you will. It's like a...
Yeah, I know the mechanic you're talking about, but I have
once
no
you
idea.
hit max rank, you have the choice to reset it. Then
a lot of games
it gives you a little flag saying, okay, this guy hit rank or rank 20 already before.
EP.
But right.
But you want to do the grind again. Yes, I totally get it.
I'm not a big fan of that because it's just like, well, you're just
so
doing
many
everything.
I know.
Right. But what if we added extra ranks?
Yeah.
Right. Really high elite ranks.
Prestige.
So when you see some, that's what it is. Yeah. And if you hit that and you see that guy in the battlefield and he's got a special cosmetic item, or even if we put some sort of marker beside his name, right? It's like, wow, that guy is badass in faction warfare. I'm more for that kind of system. But if players are dead set about having this kind of prestige system, fine.
Is it possible? Yeah.
Is it possible? Totally.
Dude, I never do that. Like any game that has that system, because a lot of games have that. I get up there and I'm like, I just put in like 2 months to get there.
Well,
There's no way I'm resetting that again, because usually it unlocks stuff too along the way, and I don't want to have to unlock that crap again.
like if I were to play a game and I get up to Master Army Sergeant General guy, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to reset back to private. So when I drop into a match, somebody's like, "Hey, this is a private." Right.
But that's
even though
us, right?
even though it shows that little prestige icon,
Yeah, I know.
it still says I'm a private.
Yep.
Right.
But that's us.
But-
There's other people that enjoy that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, prestige in some of those games, I can see. I'm on the other side, I guess, is like the reason they have those is there's no end game, right? You get all the equipment, you get all the, you know, ooh ahs, and it's like, okay, well, I'm just sitting there. So it's like a carrot for them. That's what the prestige is. It's like, oh, hey, you know, you can get this, and you know, so I do feel like it's an intrinsic thing as well. It's giving you a goal to achieve.
What allows you to progress still when
Sure.
you've really done it all.
Yeah, when you've done it all, and you know, like that's why I've always sort of felt like even in MWO, as far as I think there's something there. I mean, it could be a unique war horn or a skin of a, you know, a camo pattern, or you know, something like that to you know, toss out there, saying like, hey, you're gonna play this game and these game modes so much, and we want you to, and you know, here's something that you can do. And like I said, I can see it both ways. Like I can see your guys' perspective, because been there, done that, yeah. But then on the flip side, at least it gives something.
Well, Paul, what is the reality of something like a special warhorn or skin? I mean, I know that a lot of work goes into making those. So is that something that's possible?
Well, I'll put it to you this way: a skin is quite the investment because it has to be backwards compatible with every mech chassis.
Every freaking mech, yeah.
So it's got to be re-UV'd for every chassis that's in the game.
So
when it comes to a
items are-
warhorn, right? Cockpit items, warhorns, decals.
Sounds weird when you say
You had
Those
to
it.
things-
strain for that one. You had to really concentrate.
The cockpit items, decals, and warhorns, they're nothing to put together. Like it's
Yeah.
just it's time, yes, right? But it's not the massive investment that a
Would
skin is.
Would Dennis say it's nothing?
No.
You're taking one of my people away. All right, so but you know what? I love that idea, and I know people would totally dig the custom warhorns, especially, but even decals. You know, like the warhorns for MWOWC. Everybody digs those. Now, of course, those come with could they possibly come with benefits? Anyway, that's down the line. But yeah, I love that idea of some rewards, and for the people that love to you know, just keep going, getting progression. Having a system like that, I think, would be appreciated by a lot of people. So that is adding some lore and meaning. You know, obviously there'll be people out there that want to go above and beyond that or whatever. But again, as we mentioned in the balance, it's steps at a time. And I think that's, without adding a huge workload, that's a pretty significant update that I know some people appreciate it. I certainly would.
Well, that's just the tip of the whole adding like
Sure.
story and meaning.
Yeah.
Because the next thing that I'd like to discuss is just adding participation choices to the conflicts, right? How do you want to participate on a... Now, I've written it up as a per match decision point. Like the whole thing is like, I want to fight for faction A or B. I was originally wrote that up to say this is on a per match basis.
So you could literally
Right.
every match switch back and forth if you want.
Yes.
Is what you're yeah.
But
Yeah.
after reading some of the feedback, like I don't want to lock people in for a long period of time, right? Kind of like what the old system was. However, you can do it on an event-based time limit,
Right.
right?
So,
for
weekend
this
or a week
event,
or whatever.
Yep. For this particular thing that's going on, I am going to lock into this faction. So I agree with the loyalists. I agree with some of the Merc unit discussion was the back and forth is like, okay, flipping back and forth between every single match is kind of dilutes the whole thing about being a loyalist. And I agree with them there.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not a big issue for me to go back and tell the engineers to say, okay, we're going to actually do this on an event-based system.
All right, that sounds good. I like what I'm hearing. What do we have next?
Well, next I'd like to touch on the queuing system. Right now, what Faction Play does is that it looks for, like, when the launch timer comes up, it just looks for teams and players to put together. There's no real sensical logic behind it. It's just saying, I got to put a match together as quickly as possible, get it done, put it out there. And it would do that for all the various buckets that were out there, all the various types of queue, whether it be solo or groups launching. Right now, that's a complete mix, right? And I know there's people out there who want to see a separation of solo and group. And I can almost say this for certainty, is that we just don't have the player counts to account for that.
Right. So basically what we have is a giant melting pot, right?
Yep.
Without getting political. Now, how is it working now? You're just saying basically everybody's being thrown in. There's no gating or tiering or whatever.
It's basically a giant soup of players, and there's 2 scoops dipped into it that only hold 12 ounces of players per scoop, right?
Now
and that's what it's doing.
Okay, totally get that now.
But the changes that I'm trying to get implemented here is a prioritization algorithm, right? Yes, all players are thrown into that big pot of soup, but we need to add kind of like the Solaris launch timer in terms of saying, okay, get as many players into that soup as possible, right? Because once this time limit's up, I'm going to start strategically building teams. So there's a prioritization algorithm that has to be created. And that's where the matchmaker does things initially, like sorts all the groups by size. So it's going to create this imaginary column of groups only. There's no solo players in it. And it's organized and sorted based on size. There's another column that's all the solo players, but the solo players are going to be rated by ranked by their SSR ratings. Now, SSR is a totally different subject that we can touch on, right? But it's something that we currently have that has higher experienced players. Like, I'm not saying skill, I'm saying higher experienced players ranked at high to low. Now, once those 2 columns are created, we can sit there and say, okay, step 1 is that we're going to start matching teams, and that's based on team size. So if there's like 3 12-mans in queue, it's going to say, okay, here's match 1. I have a 12-man, I'm putting it on team 1. There's another 12-man, I'm putting it on team 2. That match kicks off. Next match gets created. I have another 12-man in queue. Okay, goes on team 1. Team 2, I don't have another 12-man, but there's a 7-man sitting here. I'm going to grab that 7-man, put it there. Now, this is to start alleviating the whole thing where you only have like a 2-man and a whole bunch of pugs fighting against a 12-man. It's going to grab the biggest groups it can to match up against that 12-man. So we put a 7-man on team 2. The next one is let's say a 4-man group. It's going to put the 4-man on there. So you have a 7-man and a 4-man versus 12. There's still a slot available on team 2. There's no such thing as a 1-person team. So it's going to start a new match while the first match is still queued, and start going down the list. It's like taking the next biggest group, putting it on team 1. It finds the next group. It's going to put it on team 2. Next group, team 1. And it's going to bounce back and forth like that until the teams are filled up. If there's always a case where there's an odd number on a given team, it's going to sit there doing the team thing until it runs out of teams, and then it's going to start grabbing from the solo queue. And it's going to take that highest ranked solo player. It's going to put him into that first match. That's a 12-man versus the 7 and 4, because that highest tier player should be able to coordinate better with those 2 bigger groups that he's with. And it'll start breaking down from there. So when you have 2 teams that are full of small groups and there's only like space for a couple solo players, it's going to be balancing those solo players based on their SSR rating and filling teams like that. eventually you're going to get to a point where it's just going to be pugs versus pugs, but then you're going to be taking similar range pugs and matching them against each other. It's no more of this like, oh, there's a tier 1 player playing against a whole bunch of tier 5 players anymore. That's not going to be the case anymore. So that's what the prioritization algorithm is supposed to do, right? Which allows us to have a lot more competitive based combat going on out there. Now, one thing that we can't do without it kind of breaking or not making sense is SSR ranking for teams. So yes, you can have a team of 12, like a group of 12, that has an average SSR ranking of 1500 versus a 12-man that has an SSR ranking of 2500, right? That's just not going to be possible to do without breaking the whole notion of trying to keep teams somewhat balanced in terms of size from the get-go. Because one, an organized team is always going to be able to dominate smaller groups and much smaller groups and solo players, just because that organization isn't there, right? So the 12-mans will always be playing 12-mans. We can take a look to see if we can do some sort of SSR thing there, but it's going to kick off a match of a 12 versus 12 no matter what the conditions are, because those guys have to get a match, right? We can't sit there saying, well, the separation between team 1 and team 2 is like over 1,000 points. Well, we're not going to launch them, right? Because there's no other 12-man that's smaller than 1,000 separation. So it's just a matter of saying, it's like, if you're a 12-man, you're or an organized group, you're going to be going up against 12-mans. And that's essentially what it's going to be going out the gate with. We will look into other ways of balancing that, but again, it's about getting this out in a timely manner with the resources that we have.
All that being said, I think that sort of addresses where solo players get put up against like larger groups, and of course, because solos aren't going away, and you need them to be a part of the population. But also too is like, I know the argument is always like, well, solos shouldn't be able to go in there. I think there's a clear warning when you click faction play, and I agree it's tough. But that being said, I think Darren, me and you have talked about this, which is, and we've made references to a few other games, which is the end goal for faction play is for you to join a unit and participate, to be able to capitalize on that organization, right, and communication aspect. Not saying you can't do that as a solo player, or maybe even as a, of course, if you're dropping as a group, you're dropping buddies. But if you want to fight fire, you got to fight fire with fire, sort of thing in that regard. If you want to compete against a 12-man, if you want to compete against those larger units, you also need, generally speaking, and so that's always tough, is to basically say like, hey, we want you to participate, but solo players may run into the fact of, or where they run into larger groups and they just get raffle stomped and it's not fun. So at least with this, it's recognizing that basically that's what the whole gist about that. It's recognizing that it's going to pit solos against solos, but there will be instances where it pulls solos and fills them in when needed. And I feel like that's a good compromise to the system and should set them up, at least solo players, because solos doesn't always mean new player. Some people just have to drop.
Yeah.
Well, right. That's the thing, is like, because this matchmaker will be pulling from the top down in terms of PSR rating from the solo queue, that means the top players are joining in on those big group fights, right? Instead of a lower skilled player just getting stomped by the other team, and the team that got that solo player is sitting there like throwing salt on his face, right? Just saying, you weren't useful, blah, right?
Yeah,
that should be squashed significantly.
Right? Yes, short of removing solo players from faction warfare, which I am in favor of, but I also understand why it's not going to happen. And the Pandora's box has already been opened, and people are experiencing it, enjoying it, and they don't want it taken away. Understood. But basically, the TLDR here is that this is an improvement to the matchmaking system for faction warfare. And hopefully when the rubber meets the road, it's going to make the matches better, which it sounds to me like that's going to be the case. That at least, for the most part, matches are going to be more fun for the people playing this game mode. And there's obviously a lot of challenges too for a game that doesn't have a huge player base to keep this interesting. But so far, what I'm hearing today, that's where it's heading.
The matchmaker is a big undertaking, trying to tune it in any kind of way, but at the same time is something that has to be addressed for this new system to work. And that touches into what I'd like to cover next, is how you participate and enter this queuing system. So when it comes to participation in faction play, we just finished covering like how the queuing system is going to work. So the way that people enter the queue, yes, you're going to enter into one giant pool like we're talking about, but you're going to enter in one of three ways. You're going to participate as a freelancer, or you're going to participate as a merc unit, or you're going to participate as a loyalist. Now, as a freelancer, you're deposited into this big pool. Freelancers cannot enter the queue in a group. You are solo players only, right? So you're the player who doesn't really care about lore, but you just want to jump in, earn C-bills. That's kind of like what a mercenary is about, but the thing is the mercs are really about C-bill. And so that's why, as participating freelancer, you cannot enter as a group. You can go into this big general pool of players. Priority for freelancers will be to fill the gaps in the group queue when needed. Freelancers will be matched based on SSR. And right now, I'm thinking freelancers should receive a slight XP boost for every match they play. So basically, it's a XP boosted path into faction play. The reason why it's with XP is that this is your chance to gain knowledge about team play, about how community war or faction play plays out. It's about gaining that experience, gaining that knowledge. So if you do decide to join with a merc unit or a loyalist unit, you're going to actually be earning XP to help you customize your mechs, or basically skill out your mechs and be able to participate at a much higher level when you return back as either a merc unit or a loyalist. Now, if you participate as a merc unit, you're deposited into the general queue. Merc units must have a minimum of a 2-man group or larger, right? Because that's what a merc unit is about. It's about unit play. The merc unit participation is going to receive a small, like, let's say, for example, 5% C-bill boost for every match they play, right? Now, this touches on something that the community brought up, and that's about rewarding unit-specific quests or dailies, that kind of things. And that's something we can definitely look into, and it's something that's quite appealing to me too, is that it rewards playing with your unit. But that being said, participating as a loyalist. Now, this is the big thing. Now, this document is fundamentally based around loyalist gameplay and loyalist incentives, right?
Which makes sense, right? Because the people that are in the faction warfare, they're much more into the lore and the story, and they usually have sides that they love.
Well, that's the thing, is the loyalists will have more freedom than the other two pathways. Because the loyalists, yes, they're deposited into the general queue. Loyalists can join the general queue as a solo player or as a group, right? So you have that option there. Loyalists are going to earn LP, obviously, for their titles and rewards. Solo loyalists, they're going to be matched with the other teams and groups based on their SSR. The reward structure for loyalists needs to be drastically expanded. And by drastically, I'm not talking like the sun and the moon and like specific chassis just for the loyalists, but I am talking about like more LP rewards, more C-bill rewards. There's mention from the community suggestions to use LP as a currency for certain items. I'm all for that as well, right? So we'll be looking into that. And not only that, it's the whole thing, a notion like we touched on earlier when it comes to the prestige things, like, okay, can we put certain milestones in for prestiging a certain number of times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you get this fairly significant reward, right?
That'd be awesome.
We'll be looking into what kind of rewards we can push down the line. Yeah, and that's pretty much how people will be participating in faction play, right? So you got this kind of a 3-tier system. You've got how you're going to participate, how often you can switch factions, which is like we were talking about earlier, is the event duration. Going back to how the matchmaker is going to be improved. So we have the one giant pool and how players are going to be distributed through that. And again, adding lore and story, right? And to me, that's one of the bigger things to put in, right? Now, there's some people out there who are going to naysay it and say this is just fluff and nobody cares, right? But the thing is, community warfare is about that story. It is about role playing. It is about taking pride in your faction or your the unit that you're working with.
I don't think the people that regularly play faction warfare or enjoy it are going to really say it's fluff. I think for the most part, it's going to be appreciated. I know I appreciate it. Some people might say it's not enough or whatever, but that's another discussion, or a discussion that will start taking place after this podcast goes live. But I feel like it's a step. And in some ways, for some people, it's going to be a significant step. Some people are going to love the fact that the lore and the story and the meaning is being added to it. I appreciate that probably the most out of these things. But also, I think updating the matchmaking and redefining kind of what the roles are is pretty. It's nice. It's a step forward. It's something.
Yeah, it gives context.
Yes.
Like and that's one of the criticisms right now of the system is like, what are we doing and why are we doing it? So, I mean, artificial or whatever someone might call it. There's plenty in the lore. I mean, you can do so much between two planets or two factions, or maybe there's a third part. At least it gives you something. And of course, my big thing, as we were talking about earlier, which is the solo players and group players, and obviously that's going to be an improvement. Is it? Is it ever going to be perfect like you mentioned? No, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we have right now.
And like lore allows us to drive a lot more interesting events, right? Because there is such a big story and like background to BattleTech that it shouldn't be hard for us to pick up something and even create stuff, right? Like the whole princess thing that we went through earlier is something that's not part of lore, but it's something that can drive a narrative and something that can drive like the reasoning behind the conflicts taking place. We can also draw into bigger things. Like, for example, like I'm not going to sit there and manually jump into every single match dropping long toms, but we could look at something like Turtle Bay. So there's this atrocity of getting orbital bombardments on civilian populations, and what are we going to do about it, right? And we can play that up, right? But we can touch on things like Turtle Bay. We can touch on things like, I even want to go far back as what happened with the Outbound Light, right? This explorer ship goes into Jade Falcon territory. Jade Falcon says, hey, that's the industry are attacking us. We're going to start stuff, right? What can we do with that? Well, obviously, we're not going to create this exploring drop ship or jump ship, but at the same time, it's like, is there stuff we can pull from lore and actually bring into the conflicts and explain why you're fighting in the first place?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I think that's just one of the biggest things that we can bring in terms of just giving some depth, giving some like notion of belonging to people. Like when I say people, I mean factions. So you have things like, why do I play as Krita? Right now, I'm going to be straight up forward with my reasonings because I'm Japanese and Krita's Japanese.
Sure.
Right. But at the same time, I love the Krita mech lineup. I love the way that Krita was kind of portrayed. So I want to be part of that. Right now, I'm going to be very frank with you. The players are right in terms of right now. What does it mean being Kritan? Well, I have a forum decal. I have colors I can pick. And yeah. So basically what I'd like to see happen is something along the lines of a faction event kicks off. And say it's between Krita and, I don't know, Davian. And there's this skirmish along the border, and it's Davian doing something screwy to Krita. I want to have the feeling of saying, like, hey, not on my watch, right? I'm going to go in there, and then I'm going to do whatever I can to actually wreck Davian. And I want Davian to be sitting there going, haha, watch what we do to Krita. Right? I want to have people have that kind of feeling behind it, rather than just like, there's an event going off, and there's these prizes, and that's it.
Absolutely. It's coming back to giving it meaning. meaningful and rewarding. And I think that, like I said earlier, that's a step in the right direction.
If I may, Paul, obviously that we've got competitive units out there that like to play, and you know, sometimes they game the system, right? Because I'm getting more rewards, I'll just jump over there. How do you see those units fitting into that sort of vision of yours?
Well, that's the thing, is like, this is what we're talking about in that feedback thread, and I brought it up a couple times about the larger units. Sometimes they'll align with themselves so they don't have to fight each other, right? Yeah, they're competitive, but they love to go out there and they just love the SEAL Club. And I am looking for ways around this, like how to stop this. I'm still taking input on it. If people have an idea that is straightforward and something that can lock this kind of behavior down, I'd be 100% behind it, and we'll try to get it put in, right? As for the current plan, it's about just allowing players to switch when they need to switch, so on a per event basis. Hopefully that just doesn't mean it's like, okay, we are part of XYZ company and we have 100 active players. We're going to go for side A. And then we have all the other bigger units going, they went side A, so we're going to go side A as well. Hopefully, if we get the loyalty feelings down in a way that people are willing to go, you know what? I don't care if they're going to that side. We're sticking up for these guys, right? The other faction. And if that works out, then we don't really have to worry about this just purely gaming the system. Now, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, and this is one of the things with gaming in general, is that a lot of design decisions that players hate, and this goes for any game, are based around exploits and gaming the system. If we didn't have to worry about that stuff, you wouldn't have all these weird gates, weird rules, weird restrictions. Now, there's that age-old debate about piracy, for example. And this is not a debate about piracy. I'm just explaining what has to happen from a developer's point of view, is that you have people who pirate your games. Well, companies obviously don't want them to pirate, so what did they come up with? DRM. DRM is the cause of pirating, right? And people hate DRM, right? But at the same time, it's like, where do you draw the line then?
Most rules in life, no matter gaming, non-gaming, whatever, are because of the people that would break them. You know, that's the why we can't have nice things comment. You know, so yeah, right.
Totally
get it.
It kind of touches on that, right? It's like, well, we have to put in some kind of rule that helps us stop this kind of behavior, because there are people who are going to deliberately go out and do that kind of behavior.
Like they say they want a fight and fair fight, but then you watch and statistically they bounce around and don't actually.
Exactly.
I've heard reports of that.
Now, of course, we're not applying that to every comp unit in any way whatsoever. It's not a blanket statement, but that stuff does happen.
It's actually a smaller subset, but the subset is significant enough to have an effect, right?
Right.
Like I said, I did that shout out in that feedback thread of, we had this clan versus clan event happen. And the shout out to the units, or the bigger units, that absolutely said, no, we're not switching. We're going to stick to our guns, to our faction, right? I don't care if there's rewards in this. We are loyal to this faction. And I was like, that's very cool. And they are bigger units. And by bigger, I mean probably top 20, top 30 type units.
Sure.
Right. So, yeah.
That's Battletech, man. People stick to their loyalties. No doubt about it.
Well, and here's where the players are right. And this is what we're trying to do with this update, is let's try to make that loyalty mean something.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
All right. So that's kind of the overarching theme, I think, of everything today is give things meaning. So I think that's a pretty good summary. Now, these things, again, to reiterate, you mentioned at the top of the podcast that everything that we just discussed up to this point is essentially things that have been approved or that can be done, right?
That are part of that document, yes.
Yeah. So do we want to move into a little bit of the feedback that we're receiving from the community on the forum thread that's up there now, or how do you want to?
Here's the thing, is that I posted my notes into the forum thread, right? So I think it'd be pertinent for us to actually touch on all of them, right?
Let's do it.
at various levels of depth, obviously.
Sure.
Hopefully with that first introduction of like what the current global document is about, right? The design doc, is that you'll see that as we go down this list, you'll see how some of these items fall into what was already discussed, right? And can easily be made part of that.
In other words, there's more room on that design doc for more things if they make sense and you approve
Exactly. Right.
Oh.
And we have the time and resources to do it.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And it fits within the scope of what you're talking about. And I feel like that's important because if someone says, oh, well, just scrap current faction play and replace it with this, you're like, well, that's not
the direction we're going
right.
in.
So
Yes.
I think that's
And
very important.
that's one thing that's kind of being communicated internally, right? Is that we are trying to get this within a decent time frame. And at the same time, it's like we don't want to just create one big new thing, right? We want to take fairly good sized chunks of a little bit from here, a little bit from there, using the current systems that we have, trying to, I don't know, make them more efficient, make them more self-autonomous running. If there's stuff like we have to do, for example, maybe there's an API we can create that the players can interact with, right, and drive their own kind of events, right? Or we can use the event system that we previously talked about and start pulling in some of the suggestions that were in that thread, right, and that we're going to discuss here shortly. Now, I was thinking about labeling things as high risk, low risk, medium risk, right? But I'm not sure if we even want to go that route, right? Because there are high risk items, but at the same time, they're low effort.
What does that mean? Right? If someone's tuning in, what is a high risk?
Well, high risk would be something considered like, okay, we can do this, right? There's a high risk that something can go wrong, right? Or there's a high risk that we do not have the resources to get this done in time. High risk is something that is basically being put on the table. People look at it and they sit there going, oh my God, that's going to be a problem. This is going to be a problem, right? There's going to be a lot of big problems that have to get solved. It's not that they're insolvable. It's just that the amount of effort and the amount of resources needed for it is going to be like massive.
You're saying like resources from like an engineer maybe, or a UI standpoint, or, you know.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And it's also not saying that an idea is not a great idea. If it's high risk, that doesn't mean it's not a great idea. It just means that there's a lot that goes into making it happen.
Let's touch on the one thing, the whole unit inventory thing. Now, I even mentioned this in that thread, is that is something that's not probably 99.999% accuracy. That is not going to happen. Right. And it's just because of the sheer amount of back end and just transaction stuff that has to get done, right? I mean, I know there's crap, I misplaced his name. Was it Cheese something? Started with a C. He went through and broke down, like, well, you can solve it by doing this, and you can solve this by doing this. Is like, yes, but all of that takes a large amount of time. So it's not about the idea, and it's not about the implementation. It's about the amount of time and resources that we have that we can allocate to just that one bit of this update.
Sure, it comes down to business decisions.
Exactly.
Yep.
Right. And I'd say about 99.98% of those business decisions are not made by me.
Sure.
Right. Basically, what I am going to be doing for the team and all this feedback that we got from the community is that I have to take every single thing that's been discussed and highlighted on my note list. I have to break that down into exactly what has to get done by what kind of engineer, what kind of artist, what kind of designer has to go in and change stuff just for this one thing to happen.
Yep.
Right. Now, not to throw anybody under the bus, but there is that one person when we're talking about the more than 4 drop decks who said, why is there's absolutely no reason why that can't happen. This will be 1 hour's worth of programmer's time.
Right.
Right. And that
so now
is
break
so
down
far
the reality.
from the truth.
Of course, right?
Right.
There's UI stuff, there's all kinds of stuff.
One, those panels do not paginate, so you cannot have more than 4 displaying at one time. How do you paginate it? Because it's got to show your 2 current drop decks for incursion and the 2 for, invasion and 2 for scouting. You got to show multiple invasion decks. You got to show multiple scouting decks. How do you do that? Well, that programmer who's implementing it's not going to come up with that. The UI designer has to come in, redo that screen, come up with how you should be able to page through stuff. Is there things like UI issues? Is there things like control issues, right? Like, do you use keyboard to move up and down a list? Do you use the mouse to just use a scroll list? That'd probably be the easiest. But the thing is, you guys want like a larger number of drop decks. How long do you want that scroll list to be when it's only showing 2 things at a time? Or do you just want to have like numbers across the tops, like you see in some modern websites when they have a carousel where you have just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And it goes up to however many drop decks you have, and you can be able to just click on the number and then just shows that drop deck.
Sure.
Right. So it's got to take all of this into consideration. The amount of time that it takes to kick off a build and have it compile all the code that has to get changed is 5 hours per build. So engineer goes in, creates this thing. We find a bug. Well, okay, go in, find the bug. That finding the bug took us 10 minutes. So it's nice and quick. The fix for it, 2 minutes. Great. 5 hours later, we can take a look at another build.
Yeah, of course. I think this,
Right.
I mean, I think most people understand. It's not that guy wasn't true to a certain extent. Maybe the programming time in an ideal scenario is 3 hours or 2 hours or whatever. But it's, again, it's a limited perspective. It's going back to what I always say, you don't know what you don't know. And it doesn't make a person wrong or bad or anything like that. It's just that in all these things, there's more than just programming, or there's more than just, you know, an artwork or whatever. It's a lot of things wrapped up in a lot of time of multiple people, and those are what we were talking about earlier, resources. And it's,
Yep.
you know, yeah.
Well, I want to touch on that, right? Like, I'm not here trying to sit there going, look, this guy was just wrong.
Right,
wrong,
of course.
right? It's just that he's misinformed.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
he doesn't.
you don't see all the connecting layers and connecting,
Exactly,
you know, like out
right?
of.
And that's not his fault by any means. That's not our fault by any means. Right? It's just
It
the
just
way
is.
development is, right?
Yeah, it just
Like,
is.
it's hard for even me to sit down and go through, like, if I were to look at any one of these points on this list of suggestions, I will guarantee you that I can list off what I think is going to be required to have this change. And I'm going to have an engineer, I'm going to have an artist, or I'm going to have somebody else come up to me and go, but what about this? What about this? Even me with all the tools at my fingertips, right, can overlook some smaller details that things just get done, right? And I don't see it getting done. I don't see it getting tasked on an individual basis in our task scheduler, but it just gets done, right? And it adds to the time, it adds to the scope of whatever we're talking about.
Yeah, and,
Right.
and no matter, even if a lead dev, you know, from whatever department comes with an idea or something they
That's
want
a
to do.
horrible term, by the way.
Okay.
Lead designer.
No, I'm saying just let's just say anybody, a department head comes and they have something that they want to implement. It has to go through the same process, right? You have to look at every single thing that's ever brought to the table, whether it's by somebody within PGI or external player dreams or whatever, and look at it through this prism of every single thing. You got to break it down exactly how many man hours, how many people, how many days, what patch it can fit into, because we're already working ahead of schedule. There's, you know, next month patch and the patch after that. It's all being worked on ahead of time. So there's so many things that go into sometimes things that look simple.
Yep. And then there's also the QA cycle. There's also all
Right.
the feedback, right? So yeah, it's a pretty big process just making any kind of change. But at the same time, it's like, this is what this discussion is about. I want to be able to go through and let people know, it's like, this is a little bit edgy, right, in terms of being able to get it done.
Yep.
Right. But there's some stuff here. Bring back queue counter. Now, there's no space up there anymore, but we can address that. Right? Can I get the UI designer to quickly take a look and say, hey, where can we put the queue counter back in packs and play screens? Put it here. And I can go over to our UI engineer and say, can you do this? And he's going to go, well, yeah, because it was there before.
Right.
Right? So bang, that's something we can get done. Planet event specific map selection, for example, would be something that's a little bit larger in scope, because one, that's a completely new UI layout in terms of like representing what's going to be happening in the upcoming match. There's all the back-end server selection stuff. The server is going to have to sit there going, okay, they've picked this planet. this planet has these maps assigned to it, right? Because right now the server's looking, this map is under conflict. Let me start building teams. So it doesn't care about map selection. That's new code. That's new logic that has to be put in, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not just like an engineer just sits there going, okay, let me open that function and just add these map selection things in there, right? Right. He has to actually break down like how it's going to work logically.
Just to be clear, also for our listeners out there, what's happening right now is Paul's kind of going through and looking at some of the bullet points that were put forward by the community in the current faction warfare thread that's on the MWO Mercs forums. So and so you're kind of going through and picking some out.
Well, kind of, because right now I'm just doing a summary of like, I just want to make sure everybody understands is like, yes, we're looking into this stuff, but it's not guaranteed.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And I can't stress that enough. Like the ideas are great. Like I'm looking at all the ideas coming in and it's like, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. I've looked at some ideas and went, that's really cool, but that is so huge in scope, right? That it just cannot get done.
But here's the big thing to me that's super important right now, and that everybody listening understands this, is that some of these are doable, potentially. I'm not going to say, again, I can't guarantee anything for sure. If you can't, I can.
To be honest, there's quite a few that's doable.
Okay, so that's super important to me. For the people that are saying, screw this, I'm not going to say anything because nothing's going to happen anyway or whatever, or being, pessimistic. The people that are getting in there and making comments, it's their bullet points that are on this list that are in front of us right now. And so if you have something, you just never know. It may work out. So, that feedback is super important and you can affect the game.
Yep. Now, I suggest that we just walk through every point that's on this list, this note list.
Sure.
And so let's start at the top. Let's make faction alignment meaningful. So let's make faction play great again.
MF. You have to do that.
Yeah, thanks, man. That's too soon.
GA.
It's too close.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Canadian. I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Anyways. So, item number 1. Faction-specific rewards. Colors, bolt-ons, cockpit items, skins, etc. Yes.
We were already talking about that.
Yes. And I think it's a great idea.
Yep.
I think it's easily done. And I'm hoping Dennis listens to this podcast because he's going to have that little vein stick out on his head. But
I'll be sure to link it to him.
But yeah, it's time consuming, yes. But at the same time, is it worth it? Very much so. Yeah. So yes, faction specific rewards will be a go.
Excellent.
LP used as a currency kind of ties into that faction specific rewards, right? Because you'll be able to, instead of using C bills or MC, use LP to buy some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So yes, LP used as a currency. Story, lore, faction-driven choices to cement a desire to stay loyal. And that's what we're covering up above, right?
Yes.
Is to make sure that loyalty and your interaction choices are effective, like they mean something.
And rewarded, yeah.
Yeah. Expand on the loyalist path drastically. I like how I'll make that kind of a note. Drastically. Okay, so we have planets that we'll create for each loyalist. And
that's a little drastic.
But yes, the reward path, the reward items, the reward tree, yes, definitely. We're going to be doing some big changes there.
Cool.
Explore on lore and global descriptions in faction play, and that's exactly what we're talking about with the storyline stuff, right? Having people buy into it, understand like why you're fighting. I've talked with Russ and some other people as well. It's like, there's some great community writers out there who love to like create little story arcs that can play out in faction play.
There's some great ones.
And hell, if you guys want to start up a new thread, it's like, I volunteer. Mm-hmm. Right? Then we can talk about it. So, yeah.
That would be fun. I know there's some great writers out there. I hope you're listening.
Map alterations.
So, but real quick, as far as the faction alignment, meaningful and rewarding, it looks like we are seeing eye to eye. So that's awesome. All that stuff is happening.
Yes.
All right, carry on. Map alterations.
Map alterations, revisit sightlines. This is things like, why can I look over the wall in Boreal or
Right.
whatever area of a map, right? And get this sightline that allows me to say that are pecking away at the drop zones and all this, right? Yeah, let's do that. It's time consuming, yes. John, the level designer, will have to split his time properly, but we can go in and look at the sightlines and make sure things aren't just drastically broken like that. Now, changing a path isn't just saying, okay, we're just going to smoothen this little area out here and then that's it. No, if you smoothen an area in the CryEngine editor, you actually stretch textures, you make objects start floating, that kind of stuff. And that has to be addressed. Like, I'm not saying this is a huge amount of work, but it is just time consuming, right? And the more detailed area that you're working in, the more of this kind of stuff you have to fix.
Now, will you be, as far as sightlines and pathing, will you be looking to any community suggestions? Maybe they already have some ideas where, I mean, obviously they do. You've seen the...
Yep.
So that will help hopefully a little bit of the process, right, as far as finding this stuff.
Well, that's another thing about the feedback thread, right? Like maybe we might want to create a separate thread, just like community warfare, or sorry, faction play maps, right?
Yeah.
Problem areas. You don't have to go in there and sit there going, look at these 3 channels. They're all messed up.
Right.
Right. If you want to make a suggestion on changing the pathing, then let us know, right? But
and the
don't
more
just say,
specific,
exactly,
the more useful it's going to be.
Right. And keep in mind is that this is the same issues. Like you change that terrain, you're changing the hit layer, the collision layer, right? Now I'll tell you this, CryEngine's collision layer is nowhere near as high resolution as the visual layer. That's why in some of the maps you'll see like over a cresting just over a hill, you can see the other guy, but you shoot at him and it hits this invisible wall.
Polar
Right.
Highlands.
Right. Exactly. Right. And that's just because the hit mesh is not as high resolution as the render mesh. Now, if you make the hit mesh as high resolution as the render mesh, you are going to take such a big performance hit. It's not going to be funny, right? And this is the fun stuff about CryEngine being so CPU intensive rather than GPU intensive.
Is
right?
that something that you can be uber, like, is that a global setting or is that more like...
That's a per map setting. Right?
So
because the bigger the map is, right, the less you can have detail. But the
Sure.
smaller the map is, the more detail you can put into the collision mesh, right?
So what I was wondering is, like, take Polar, for example. I know we're talking about faction play, but Polar, no one cares about the outside, right? As far as the high end, what's keeping everybody inside. So that could be low res, right? Are you able to do that to where like everything else is higher res inside, but can you be selective in what is high res or not?
That is a global setting per map,
Ah.
right? And that's engine side. That's not us sitting there going, hey, we can't do this because we don't want to mess with these numbers, right? It's an engine side issue. Let's move on.
Yeah. Next
Look
point after
at generator positioning.
Right.
Now I saw a few people going, this generator's out of place, blah, blah, blah. Fine. Let's look at them, right? The more specific you can be, the more we can address it, and the faster we can address it, actually. You don't have to say, like, you should move it here. It's just that this is the problem one, and this is why it's a problem. Then we can take a look at it, take a look at the sidelines, the approach lines for that kind of feedback, and then make fixes from there. Next up, game modes and hooks. Okay, so we have the tug of war meter at the top of the faction play screen. Now, people suggested making adjustments for less punitive win conditions and flips. What they're talking about there is when you do have the majority of the tug of war, then last minute some team comes in and just totally destroys the fact that even though you had 96% of that bar, you lost it.
It's like the last
Right.
30 minutes or whatever, right? People
Exactly.
are bringing up. Okay.
Right. So can we change those numbers to make them less punitive? And it's 100% yes. I mean, let's look into it. Let's find out what numbers work, and we'll go from there. Right.
Nice.
Removal. Now, this is something I noted just because of the whole event system coming in, right? The new event system coming in,
Right.
and some of the things the players are requesting in terms of like continuity between matches and events. And this is something that we have to get rid of, right? Well, we can use it, but then use it specifically for a specific event. For example, Two-Kid, yes, you can use the tug-of-war thing, right? But for something like Save the Princess, we don't need the tug-of-war thing at all, right? So that's a bigger undertaking, but as I firmly agree that that's something that we do have to address, right? And that is something that we talked about in our tech review meetings. And it is something they're looking into. This is something that's driven by the back end, right? And the back end feeds the information to the UI front end saying, this is what has to be displayed on that screen. So if we get rid of this notion of having a tug of war for a specific event, then the back end's going to have to tell the UI not to draw this specific stuff on the screen, right? So it is a bigger kind of thing to undertake, but at the same time, it's something we want to address and something we've got on the table right now.
Sounds good.
Incursion-based building health adjustments. Now, I would say probably about 70% of the feedback that I saw is in favor of this. And then there's about 30% saying, don't bother, right?
Basically, so a ninja group can't get in there and destroy everything, or
exactly
right? Along those lines.
Yeah. And if you are falling behind on mech count, right, you actually have a way of like trying to sustain the win by protecting your base. That's something we can do. I mean, it's easy number change on a per map basis. You just run through and just say, change this to this, right? And do that on every single map. But the thing is, like, we need to get, like, 70% is not a small margin, right?
Sure.
But the thing is, like, I want to make sure we hit numbers that make sense, right? And I also don't want to run into that situation. I mentioned it, but people kind of not shot it down, but rebutted it. And they were correct in it. But at the same time, this can happen where you're down to like your last few mechs and you're trying to blow up this base, but the base has so many hit points that you're just not getting anywhere, right? So we've got to keep that in mind. It's not going to be the deciding factor, but just keep it in mind.
There's a little balance there. I'm wondering, you said 70%. I'm wondering if the 30% that said don't bother, if they are just indifferent, or do they did anybody bring up a...
No, people were just like, no, this is not a good idea, right? It wasn't like vehemently against it. It's just like, I just don't think it's going to work the way you think it's going to work, kind of counterattack.
Did they think there'd be a negative impact?
Negative impact? No, not really.
Right.
Drop zone wall adjustments. Now, this was suggested by Ash and a few others, right? Was taking the walls in Incursion, for example, pulling those outer walls that are defending the base, at the drop zones and the base. Wait a second. No, this was drop zone specific. The fences that guard drop zones is angle those in 45 degrees, so you get a little bit more cover when you're on the inside. People brought up the fact that if you do 45 degrees, you just turn that thing into a ramp where you can just jump into the spawn point, right?
Right.
Now, there's talk about the Long Tom coming back. Well, not coming back, but using Long Tom as something, right? Long Tom's done. The Long Tom, I can tell you, is 100% a toy that I get to play with and just drop it on random people.
Man, so all that development money just goes to Paul Power.
Exactly.
Paul, has any thought been put into? I know a suggestion I heard that was actually pretty cool was sort of like other games where, and we have it, out of bounds zone, whereas the attacking team wouldn't be out of bounds, but that would be out of bounds, or an area where that team just couldn't go to up into a point that could potentially stop. And has that been considered?
There's that counter to that too, is that you have teams that will cower inside the drop zones, relying on the coverage of the drop ships and the fences, right? Now, I'm going to put this out there, touching on Long Tom, but not using Long Tom. Now, imagine a real world military situation. Phil, you've been there. Is that for a drop ship, or let's say a military helicopter has to go in and drop off these soldiers, right? What is it about the landing zone that has to be done every single time, right? It has to be cleared out. It has to be made.
Has to be secured.
Sure that it's safe.
Secure the LZ.
Right? So how about this? 5 seconds, or maybe 10 seconds, however much time before a dropship comes in, we already the living snot of the drop zone.
Secure the LZ.
Yeah. So basically, if there's a friendly in there, or if there's an enemy in there, it's going to get hammered. Right? So it's like, here it comes. You'll hear a siren or some sort of warning saying, get out of the drop zone area. We're about to clear it. Right? In comes the artillery. Boom, 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 boom. A whole bunch of explosions. That prevents people from sitting in the spawn, right? Just camping in there, just saying, okay, I don't want to go out there. I'm going to get blown up, so I'm just going to hide behind these walls. Well, you can do that, but the artillery is going to blow the living snot out of you.
I like that idea. Now, I don't know if I'm missing any negative side effects, but I like it.
The side effects could be, let's just say, if we're talking about just regular map play or even in incursion stuff, whereas sometimes it's not the drop zone right at the drop zone. Sometimes the enemy camps, more towards their base, but they have the range if they're playing clan or whatever to sit back at 600 and just hammer you as you drop.
That'd be a sight line.
Right.
Yeah.
But then
I fully agree with that. But I'm specifically talking about the drop zones themselves. Right?
That was a major complaint that was brought up multiple times, was people actually camping inside the drop zones. That's where this whole wall thing came up.
Yeah, so, I don't know if you'd like to be self-artied, though. I mean, if you had a guy that was like legitimately fighting and then came back and was waiting for his team to drop off, or else
the thing is, you don't have to stand in the drop zone to do that, right? You can't
maybe that's
go
only
find
a
a
safe
cover
place because then your team's pushing out. I guess that's what
you might have
a
bigger problem if that's the only safe space, right?
I mean, if I'm playing a cicada, like.
That being said, just an idea, right? Let's hear some feedback on it.
Yep.
Right. Okay, where were we? Tug of wars, incursion base, drop zone, angle adjustment. We're touching on that, and this is why this kind of side conversation came up. Mm-hmm. More reward kickers based on player behavior. Now, what a reward kicker is an event that says, this player performed this, give them this reward, right? Something that's easy to identify is spot assist. You run out, you press R, another member on your team points and shoots at it, right? You get spot assist. Mm-hmm. More of those kind of rewards for player behavior, what you're doing in the game, right?
In a way to kind of essentially train player behavior. Yeah.
And the thing is, yes, we can add a bunch more of those in there, but make sure it's actually acceptable behavior, mm-hmm. right? Now, here's an example. The kill most damage done versus kill shot. Kill most damage done rewards higher, right? Because you put a lot more effort into it. Kills most damage done, just the kill shot. This is something that we had an event with before, right? And I talked with the marketing team to never do it again.
Because what was the player behavior?
Player behavior, because it was based on kill shot.
Yeah.
Right? Was just running around. You wait for an assault that's
right.
hammering
so people
on
were
somebody.
Holding back.
Yeah, and you just pick off the last shot. Bing, done,
Absolutely.
Rewarded. Right? Which is negative player behavior. So it's a matter of making sure that these kickers, these reward kickers, are encouraging proper gameplay.
Yep.
Right. Can more be added? Yes, definitely.
Cool.
Right. So it's not a huge undertaking. There are some things that a gameplay engineer is going to have to look into. Mm-hmm. As long as it's not really complex stuff like, okay, you target a mech, somebody fires LRMs at it, you target another mech, fires LRMs at that, then you go back to the previous one and it lands the shot, and then it's like you get this juggling mechanic done. No,
right.
We can't do that, right? But if it's something like, okay, here's a little thing. It's like, I'm not sure how many people know, most people probably know, is that you can drop an artillery or a airstrike by aiming at a UAV, and it basically drops the airstrike right below the UAV. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's something that's like people can actually get rewarded for that. It's like trick shot, whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Or trick targeting, whatever. Right? That's the kind of stuff, yes, we can look into and get added.
Cool. Now, we already talked about the Q count, bringing that back.
Yeah.
We talked about that previously, and that's possible.
Yes. That's because we did that little side discussion. Same as the planet event specific map selection. Mm-hmm. Now, this is something that would have to get some major back-end work, right? But I think we can do it. The amount of work involved, I'm not sure. But I can see it saying, okay, if you click on this planet, right, here's what the event system is telling you. It's like, this is the planet that's in contention. These are the factions that are involved. And here's a list of maps that you can use for this conflict. And when it comes to the event-specific stuff, right, it's like, maybe this is taking place on a desert planet, and the only map that should be in rotation is Canyon Network.
Yep.
Right. So
it does add something. It's adding flavor, making maps maybe a little bit more special, and maybe getting to see some maps that you wouldn't see otherwise. I like that.
And it plays towards the event too, right?
Sure.
Because if we're talking about playing on this, okay, we're fighting over the plains of this planet.
Right.
Then why the hell is Alpine in there? Okay. Objective play reward increase. Now, this is something that's a little bit hard to do. We did do it, right? We didn't push the numbers up that high, but we did increase the rewards based on completing objectives based on the game mode. Increasing that, yeah, we can do that, right? The trick is to not inflate the economy, but at the same time, it's like there's room there to move up a bit more, so we can do that. Conquest score adjustment. Now, I'm getting like all kinds of feedbacks from both directions. Like, yes, increase it. No, don't increase it. Or increase it drastically. Or
so it's one of those dividing subjects.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like right now it's 1,500, right? If we bump it up to 1,750, is that going to break it?
I don't think it'll break it.
2,000 sounds like it might be a bit high, right? But 1,750, is that the middle ground that people can agree on?
It's tough because I've talked a lot about this on the podcast and asking people or during my streams, and you have people that are basically like, no, MechWarrior is a PvP game. That's all I care about is a player versus player. Even if it's assault or conquest, I don't really care. It shouldn't be equal, right? You should earn more from killing the mechs. And on the flip side, though, some of these other outlets for mechs or conditions, let's just say win conditions happening. For instance, assault or even conquest, you'd rather just go and kill the mechs because you're going to earn more. And so I feel like there's the key point for me, at least the takeaway is you should be able to earn more potentially by winning.
Well, that's objective play reward increases. That was the previous point. This is just about conquest score adjustment. Right, like the winning condition for conquest.
Well, anyway, the way we're addressing this list is that some of again, some of these are possible, some of these are not.
Yeah.
So that's something that is possible, right?
It is very possible.
Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but more discussion can happen to determine.
It can happen. I just need to find a number that makes everybody happy, because 2,000 might sit, like Phil was just mentioning.
Yeah.
2,000 might push it into the range of just like, why bother? Just kill the other team.
Yeah.
Right.
And it may be that it needs to sit right where it's at. If the feedback is 50-50, then I don't know.
But
anyway,
what would be the player behavior if you did a slight boost? Is it going to change anything? So if anything, if it doesn't change a whole lot, then when there
it gives you the chance to recover from a mistake.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is like.
So,
but again,
is that an acceptable thing? Right. If you made a mistake, should that be a black and white win-loss condition? Or if you make a mistake, there's a slight window where you can actually recover from that.
But let's let the players discuss this in the thread.
Yep.
Next one.
Adjust launch countdown. So this is allowing players to have a little bit more time organizing themselves, right?
Right.
And that's a number change. Not hard to do.
Bio breaks, etc. Yeah.
I started the conversation in that feedback thread by just call me Ash. How long do you want it to be, right? What's too long, right? So that's what I got to find out. But changing the number is something you can easily do.
Yeah.
Earlier win conditions based on team destruction, like stomps. Now, this is an interesting one. I don't think it's a huge undertaking. It requires a gameplay engineer, right? But at the same time, what do you consider a stomp? Right?
Yeah, like obviously there will be some...
At what point should we stop the gameplay?
Right. I mean, you can definitely say, yes, that was a stomp that I just saw, but that line, finding that line is going to be the difficult part, because you'll have some people that will be like, no, don't, we can do this still. And, yeah.
Yep. Like it's a double-edged sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have the attackers like, no, I want to get more C-bills and everything because I'm destroying components, I'm blowing mechs apart, right? Then you have the defenders, and you have some defenders like, I don't want to sit here.
And pessimistic defenders.
Right? Yeah, I don't want to sit here getting my head stomped in, right? This is stupid. Let me surrender. Now,
or others that are like,
it's
we're
a PvP
Kirita, we'll
online
never
game,
surrender.
right?
Yeah.
Why do you surrender?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But at the same time, I'll agree with players out there is that it can be somewhat daunting to sit there and just knowing that you are not going to win no matter what you do.
Right.
Right. And it's a matter of finding, like, where do you draw that line?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to need some more feedback on that as to where you do draw that line.
Well,
definitely worth discussing, and how
you know,
you deal with it. Not only where you draw the line, but how you deal with it.
And then also, like, I've seen this in other games. And Paul, I know you mentioned Dota and stuff when we have conversations, like where
voting system or something.
Yeah, where you get into a
funny.
match and just like two guys, and you see this in MWO. Unfortunately, sometimes you just get matched up with teammates, and they're like, "Oh, you know what the hell? Screw this!" And they would just bounce, so they'll drop out, or they would just, you know, like surrender just because. And that's one thing where you can, if it can be abused, it's one of those like slippery slopes. I do agree that obviously it would suck if you're just sitting there and there's no way hope of winning or whatever. But that is one of those like pieces where I'm always hesitant, you know, in that conversation, because how many times does that really happen, especially with the changes that we're talking about, right? Because the feeling right now is those are based off what's currently in faction play. Does any of the changes that are going to be going in change that? I don't know. That's a good. It's a good question. It's a good like topic. It's just one of those where, but would there be any negative behavior coming out of this? You know,
There could.
Not to focus on that. I'm just
Well,
saying,
no. This is it's possible. Like, I'll say this: in World of Warcraft, in a game called There, in another game, Team Fortress, I used to be one of the trolliest bastards playing the game, right? And it was about how can I break this?
What?
How can I take advantage of this? How can I exploit this? And as I grew out of that, that was back in my like late teens, early 20s. So that was like 50 years ago. No, like, it's about how you can break stuff, right? And how is it going to get exploited? And when you have a system where you can surrender, essentially, right? It's like somebody's having a bad match. Well, I'm surrendering. I'm going to screw over the entire team by making us go down, right? Because one of the funny things is that Dota's surrender trigger is by typing GG in chat.
Oh, really? Nice.
And I would love to sneak ninja that into the MechWarrior Online.
Oh, that would be a fun day.
GG or WP will automatically end
Right.
the match. But yeah, people can exploit that. People can do it just to annoy the teammates, right? The percentage of people out there doing that, it's not going to be high, right? But it will happen. But at the same time, it's like if we make it automated, which is even harder to do, but well, it's not hard to do. It's harder to do correctly, to make sure that it's covering all the bases of what is considered a valid surrender situation.
Isn't the most common system like a player chat vote? I mean, that seems to be what I've seen in most. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's another thing is that our game client does not read chat. Right? There's no parsing system in there. Yes, there's a bad word filter. Right? There it'll mark up stuff in your chat. Then CSRs can open up your game and say, "Oh, I see what you said." Right? So stop swearing in games.
like to apologize on behalf of myself.
I had no idea I was being recorded.
Yeah, and if it gets excessively bad, we turn on your webcam.
I don't know if you'd want to do that.
Mine's pointing at the ceiling.
Bill doesn't
next
really
one,
wear
next
pants.
one. Let's move on.
Okay. So where were we? Early win condition. Okay, that's the team stomp issue. We can look into it, but again, we're gonna have to find some sort of magic number that works for everybody.
Sure.
Call to arms timer change. Now, this is something that was mentioned where the call to arms is going off in the last 2 minutes before our match kicks off. Some people wrote suggestions like, well, put it at the front. Like as soon as the match starts to kick off, well, send out the call to arms, get people in there faster. And I explained the reason why it's on the tail end is to allow players who are active in faction play, sitting there waiting for a match, to get priority queuing.
Yeah, they get first rights.
Right. Yeah. And then we allow the pugs and people who are just like, oh, hey, there's something going on, I'll go join in. Right. They get lower priority queuing. There's no problem for us to increase the amount of time, like make that pop up earlier. Right. It's just that we'd like to refrain from making it front loaded. Right. So that's something we can look into. And if it's back loaded, how early do you want that to go up before players from just wherever get pulled in?
Yep.
Right. So another point of discussion. Unit-based objectives. Now, this is something that would require quite a bit of work, but at the same time, I see this as something that's like really, really cool. Right.
What would be an example of a unit-based objective?
A unit daily, right? Here's a simple thing.
Nice.
Play 3 matches in community warfare.
Right.
Right. If you do that, your unit earns X amount of C-bills into their coffer.
I like that.
Right. Or maybe it's MC, maybe it's whatever. Just touching on that, right? I've seen a lot of requests for rewards to be MC based.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a free-to-play title, you have to be very, very careful on how you distribute the hard currency. That's the
legality-wise,
well,
right?
Legally-wise, and the way that you monetize, basically, right?
Right.
And there's 2 terms used in the free-to-play market. Is called hard currency versus soft currency. Soft currency is things like C-bills, LP, XP,
right.
that kind of stuff. Hard currency is the actual real-world money to an in-game currency, right? And that's just a very, very scary place to start just kind of throwing things around. Like, it's not large amounts that they're asking for. I understand that, but at the same time, it's still something that's going to be kind of tough to play with.
If you take thousands of people all of a sudden getting an influx of MC, there potentially could be effects to the
well, here's an example. You have a small laser in one of those supply crates, right? Somebody can turn around and sell that for, let's say, 5,000 C-bills. Okay, that's 5,000 C-bills to that one player. Times that by everybody who's got a supply crate.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's how much it affects the in-game economy, right? So it sounds cheap as you as a singular player getting that item, and you'll get 5,000 C-bills for it. But from a global economy point, is that that's happening every single day, right? With every single supply crate.
Yep.
Right. So that being said, unit-based objectives. Now, can we do it? And like I said, it's a fairly big undertaking. I'm not sure if we can, but I'm going to really push on this one, right? Whether it be a daily, whether it be an actual quest system, right?
Yeah.
Or it could be like complete this event chain, like this campaign.
Yeah, I was just going to say it could be multiple things that,
right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of potential there. I think it's a great idea, but obviously it takes some work.
Yep. So it's just a matter of saying, can we get it done? What's the implementation cost to it?
Yeah.
Right.
I love that it encourages group play and becoming part of it.
That's what I love about it too.
Yeah.
Right. Like it just makes sense.
Yeah.
Queuing integrated into looking for group. Now this is something I'm not 100% sure if we can even do. Right. But it is interesting, and I do have to get engineers to look at it and see if it is possible. Right. And that's saying things like, if you're in you're a solo player and you want to play in faction play, it instantly puts you into looking for group. Right? So it starts the whole group mentality, getting people together, right? Talk about your strategies.
Strategies.
Talk about your strats.
Yep.
Get ready for a drop and go.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, something definitely worth looking into, and I have to get a tech review done on that.
Cool.
Reward group play at a higher level than solo. I can see what you're trying to do here. You're trying to encourage group play over solo play, right?
Isn't that when you get winning?
Yeah.
I mean, really, that's the benefit,
Yes.
right? Communication, organization.
Groups, ROP. Yeah, I see the direction, but I just don't know if that's the right.
Because that would just be abused. Because all the units that are, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, or you're a 12-man group. It is like, well, let's maximize rewards by breaking into 6 2-mans. Right.
Yeah.
Well,
You
not
might
even
not
that,
play
it's-
together, but at the same time, you're getting group play rewards, right?
I mean, the whole idea about faction play really ultimately is to be a part of a unit.
Yes.
So,
Well, maybe the feedback can flesh this idea
Yeah,
out
I don't
more
know.
to something that can work. But
I'm gonna be like, "Shut up, Phil! You don't know what you're talking about."
yeah, I'm sure people say that to everything I say. Let's do the next one.
Okay, scouting mode and conditions investigation. Okay, so this is the whole problem of diving. Right. Now, I'll admit that at the start of scouting mode, that diving mechanic was pretty fun and pretty funny to watch. Right. Like
Oh,
it's
sure.
a matter of timing. You got to shut yourself down in just the right spot, hoping and praying they don't see you, and just running for it last second. Right. You see some very last second dives that are just like, wow,
Insane.
great
Yeah.
work. Right. But at the same time, that is not the main objective of what this game mode is supposed to be. Right, so we can look into how to fix that. I'm open to suggestions. I'll start coming up with some of my own. See if we can come to common ground, and if we do, let's put it in.
Cool.
Rewards for call to arms participation. This is kind of interesting, right? It's like, do we incentivize that call to arms, right? You're not totally invested into faction play, but hey, if you're willing to fill a spot, jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give you some little shinies.
Yeah,
Right, so-
sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's easy to investigate, and
Sure.
we'll take a look into it. Battlefield-based tonnage restrictions. This is going to be a tough one, right? Because one, we don't know which map you're dropping into until you're connected to a dedicated server, which means the match is about to kick off,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do we base restrictions,
Yeah.
like your tonnage restrictions, based on that? So this one, I would have to say, is almost
High risk.
a no-go kind of situation.
Super high risk.
Right. I mean, I'll go to bat. I don't mind doing that. It's just saying, hey,
Right.
engineers, take a look at this. What do you think? Right. And they're going to turn blue, and then I'm going to have to apologize, and then we move
I
on.
was just kidding.
It was just a joke. April
Yeah.
Fools. Okay. System updates. More than 4 drop decks. Now, we kind of touched on this, but at the
Yeah.
same time, is that I don't think it's a big problem. Right.
Mhm.
It just takes a little bit of time to investigate how long it's going to take to get done.
A little bit more than just a few hours of programming.
VoIP prior to drop. Now, I have some good news and bad news. Bad news is that you're not going to get it way in advance of the drop.
Yeah.
But there is that window that's just before you drop into a match. Where
Right.
You're kind of sitting in the lobby and the other team is being built.
Yep. And that
There
would be the
is
time.
a chance to bring VoIP up into that state.
I like that.
So it's
People can
allowing
start-
you to,
Yeah.
people can start talking about their strategies.
Well, and
before-
you can, and if you have some solo players and you're part of a group, you can start informing them of what. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. UI refresh on friends list is a go. Favorites on friends list is something I still have to get approved, but it doesn't sound like a huge undertaking.
Cool.
Status indicator. Now, this is something that it's not like high risk, but at the same time, we have to look into exactly what has to get done, because now the server has to send information about clients, like everybody's individual client, as to what state they're in, right? And that's something that's not happening right now. Online, offline, that's a state, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But what game mode are they in? What kind of queue
Mhm.
are they in? That is not anywhere near in the system.
Right.
So again, it's investigation, but again, more than willing to go up to bat and say, hey, guys, what do you think?
All right.
Coffers, unit management, taxation, removal, change. We have no problem removing that taxation, right? It's about big units. Right now, the biggest units. I mean, I took a look at the metric poll, and you can have units out there that have like 200 members in it.
Mhm.
Right? How many active players do they have in it?
Mhm.
40. Right. So it's not like these huge units are a big problem right now. Right. I mean, if faction play becomes really popular again, it might become an issue that we'd have to address later. But for now, we don't have to. and removing that tax, like inviting a new player into your unit, we can get rid of that. C-bill transfer between players. Now this opens up that whole nightmare of gold farming, essentially, right? Which is something we do not, and it actually seriously harms free-to-play games. But at the same time, is that we had a discussion just yesterday with some of the players in that thread, and some of the ideas were thrown around. It's like, okay, well, my first initial pitch was you have to be in the unit for X number of days, right, before you can be eligible to receive C-bill transfers. Now, while that works in terms of like, it makes it very inconvenient for gold sellers to do this kind of stuff, right? But at the same time, it's like, it kind of penalizes the player, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of the suggestions that were brought up is like, well, what about a drop limit? Like you have to drop X number of times with the unit in order to be C-bill eligible.
Right.
And to me, that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Look into that, right?
Discussion, the magic of discussion.
If it's 20 matches or however many matches, right? And you get this flag set on your accounts that you can now receive C-bills, and it's up to the unit leader to sit there saying, okay, you can take this many C-bills.
Right.
Or he gives you that many C-bills.
Right.
There is some back and forth about the notion of almost like a loan-based system, but again, that touches on the inventory system that I cannot run down the road of, right? I can tell you straight out that I'm going to have engineers just going, no.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like, okay, are there any other conditions? Well, yeah, those 20 matches should be done in faction play. It's not like you can go out and play 20 or Solaris matches
Mm-hmm.
with a unit member and get this thing done really quickly. No,
Right.
That's not going to happen, right? It's going to be played in faction play. Do you have to play with anybody in the unit? Or should it be the officer level? Or should it be the group unit leader? I'm suggesting going with the officer level because you want to make those ranks mean something.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the feedback members were saying, it's like, yeah, we have guys who are trainers, right? And if they play with
They vet new players, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what, yeah, I've done that in every single
Play
unit
with
I've been
those
in.
guys.
Yep.
Right? Bang.
Yep.
There you go. You get the C-bill transfer option. So that is totally open for discussion. It is also open for implementation. What the requirements are going to be for that, I don't think it's going to be too big because you kind of do that with the MC that's currently ticking off of planets that you have your tags on. Yeah, so it's not going to be a huge undertaking. You just got to see what the impact's going to be using C-bills.
Cool.
And the last one on the note list, tool for players to enter planetary data. Love the idea. Have one thing. Can I trust you faction play masters out there not to put stuff in there that shouldn't be in there?
No.
Right.
What we were discussing earlier, the rules are always in place because of you guys. But obviously, maybe there's ways around that.
Yeah, there's ways around it. We
Right.
can make it a private tool that only certain whitelisted players have access to.
Or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Right. Like I can only imagine what somebody's going to plug into Cookin' Pleasure Pit and all that stuff. Right.
The problem is the references that you just don't quite get, the ones that slip by.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where they say something totally lore based that goes totally over my head and like, yeah, that's
Right.
cool. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
everybody's like,
Exactly.
yes. So that's something I'd actually have to look into because that's a interface between the database systems and the web server systems, right? And that's not an easy bridge to gap, especially when it comes to data entry. But at the same time, let's take a look at it. I'll talk to Jamie, our web guy. I'll talk to Darren, our database guy, and see if they can talk to each other.
Sounds good.
There's a lot to digest there, just FYI.
There's a ton. Well, there's a lot to edit. You guys just gave me so much work, but it's cool. We went through that. We went through your document, Paul, with the stuff that's already basically being implemented in some time in the near future. And then we covered everything that is in the community's request in the thread. Up to this point, most of it anyway, the stuff that was brought up multiple times. And so this brings us to basically a point where there's a lot of stuff being done, maybe not, huge new features or whatever, but what I like, it's, you know, it's polish, it's you know, quality of life improvements, and then we're going to be able to talk about more because there's, like you said, there's more room on the dock. So this is where we want to begin part 2 of the discussion, right?
There is also one more thing I want to talk about.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know.
And no, this is just something that is in the thread, but it's not on my note list here.
Yep.
Right, is gating access to faction play.
Right. New players.
That's a touchy one, right?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I get it, right? Like we even mentioned when you're first launching into faction play, this is for experienced players, blah, blah, blah. You, Mr. Experienced Player, Darren.
Yep.
You've been playing faction play since day one, blah. You're trying to get your buddy to join MechWarrior Online. He joins in and you're like, yeah, let's go play faction play. Well, guess what? He's not going to be able to play until he plays 20 matches or however many matches of quick play.
Yep.
How do you feel about that? Should you be able to pull somebody brand new in trial mechs into faction play?
Yeah, I guarantee there's going to be all kinds of different perspectives on this subject matter. I've already seen it. I would guess that the faction players, the people that are currently playing, would lean more towards gating it. But I think there are inherent issues with that, and it's not just a black and white easy issue.
Exactly. Like, I personally, right, this is not the opinion of Piranha Games and all that other stuff, right? But personally, I do lean towards that. It's like, yeah, this is a team-oriented, team-focused game mode.
Yeah.
Right. That is about playing in the inner sphere and playing in that giant conflict that's going on out there. And somebody who's coming in with trial mechs who doesn't know the controls very well, who doesn't know how to, I don't know, engage the enemy very well, you should actually go into quick play a few matches, get used to the game, get used to controlling at least, maybe even owning 1 or 2 mechs, right? At least having some idea of like what it's required to own a mech, scale it up to make sure that you're got all your eyes dotted, T's crossed. Yeah. Anyways,
your letters done correctly.
You have your poop in a pile before you enter faction play.
Yeah.
So let's throw that out there. What do you guys think? Right.
I think there's like this ideal trajectory that in your mind where you'd want to see somebody come in and start with solo play, then find some friends, do group play, then try maybe Solaris or go into faction play. But I see it time and time again with new streamers coming in or whatever. They'll just say, oh, it's this faction play thing, and they'll jump right in there. And people won't do the ideal trajectory. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of room for discussion
I think gating is perfectly reasonable. I think it detracts from the people participating in faction play if you're bringing in literally a brand new player. And then on top of that, brand new players, even though they get a warning, they just do it. And it takes away from their experience because they're like, oh, fuck that, I'm never touching that again.
Well, it's Windows install syndrome, right?
Right.
I call it. Is
I don't need to worry about a tutorial.
You're just clicking next. You don't read anything. You just next.
And then, of course, the experience, the other people on the team. And then, you know, it leads to, so I think it's reasonable to say like 20, 50 matches or whatever. Like the player should have X amount of time in the game. Now, that doesn't mean there'll be X skill level. Just means you have enough matches in the game, time in the game, experience to at least
understand what's going on.
Yeah. I don't think it's crazy at all. And yes, the argument can be made, well, I'm going to bring a friend in or, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'll walk him through. Well, you detracting from the overall experience. And what kind of friend? Take him in a quick play. And, you know, what kind of mech bro are you? Come on, don't toss him in the deep end. That's what it is. It's like, hey, oh, you don't know how to swim? Oh, don't worry, and just throw him in. Like,
that's how my dad taught me how to swim. Right? But anyway, can we wrap this up, guys?
No.
No.
I want to pass the baton onto the community. Is what I want to do.
Well, next up,
okay,
I'd just like to talk about this pie recipe that I found.
Oh, Paul. I can never picture you as a troll. I don't know what you're talking about. In your youth, you were a
you
troll.
You can't? Oh, man. Thank you, Paul, for taking the time.
Can I tell a side story?
Yeah.
The whole thing about being trolly and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Back in Vanilla Wild, pets were not baseline pets. Like, they had different attributes, different skills, different little buffs that they all had. right? There was was it a pig or was it a wolf? It was some sort of animal, right? That would wander the plains just below Thunder Bluff, the Torrent starting city.
Was it a unique one?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it would spawn once every hour.
Right.
Right. And it'd only walk around for 10 minutes, then despawn. Alliance players would really love it because it was one of the best level 10 pets that you could ever have. Right. So Alliance players were running all the way from Alliance territory into this area trying to get this pet. Right. I would sit there and wait for Alliance players to come running across the field, and you could see them normally dismiss their pet, which means they've basically said, okay, I have no pet anymore.
Right. So
I'm going to tame this one.
Yeah.
Right. They dismiss
so you knew
the pet.
they were vulnerable.
Right. I step out from behind the tree and crit shot them. Boom, dead.
Oh, Paul.
So they have to respawn at the nearest graveyard.
Yeah.
Takes a little while for them to get back. Okay. Yep. Now they're back. What do? I kill the spawn. So now they can't do it. Now they can't tame it for another hour. Right?
Dude, I have so similar stories with EverQuest. I was a bit of a troll with EverQuest when it first came out. I'm not going to tell my stories. Yeah, I was such an asshole in EverQuest.
And not to mention, you guys are horrible people. Like, I'm a nerd, but you guys are like super nerds.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I did that one day. Like, I didn't sit there for days and days and days doing it. I did this for one day, and I did it about 4 or 5 times, and I just felt so bad doing it.
That
I was
guilt,
like,
right?
Okay, I gotta stop. I can't do this, right? I just felt so bad because it took like a half an hour to run from Alliance territory into Horde territory, and then you gotta wait an hour for this thing to spawn, and then I kill it.
I would just train a bunch of super high level mobs into an area full of low level people. Like it was totally exploitable in EverQuest. So I'd be a high level character and I'd just train these giants or whatever to run along a beach and they would demolish everybody in the path. It was I can't believe anyway. Yeah, I was an a-hole back then, but I've changed.
Yes, me too.
Or I haven't. Some people think I still am. But anyway, thank you, Paul, for spending this. This was a very long podcast after just doing a podcast. That's 2 in a row. And we spent a lot of time on this today, faction play. So we will be looking forward to is this going to be a new thread that we're going to start as far as feedback for this?
Yes. Yeah. Because if I continue on with the old thread, people who are listening to this podcast do not know what was said in the old thread. So it's best to summarize what's been going on since then, right? At the start of a new thread, so people can just start talking on the new information.
Which will be mostly what we discussed at the second half of this podcast.
Yep.
So that breakdown.
Even the first part.
Yeah.
Right? Because the first part covered areas that weren't discussed in the discussion.
So a breakdown of everything that we went through here will be up on the MWOmercs.com forum, and we'll start a new discussion thread. We'll get your feedback, and if possible, as Paul said, it can be implemented into the changes that are coming somewhat soon. So any parting words, Paul, before we go? No more vanilla WoW stories or EverQuest.
Well, this one time in Counter-Strike? No, that's good. Let's get the discussion moving, right? So we can get moving forward on implementation.
Cool. Phil?
Yeah, obviously I know we talked about balance with you and Chris, and you guys, the community, listened and responded. We will be doing another one after the next PTS as well, so stay tuned on that.
That's a good point. So that the discussion thread for the balance and PTS is ongoing right now. Mm-hmm. So people should head out if you have interest in that as well. Head over there, give some feedback, join the discussion, and like Phil just said, there will be a follow-up podcast where we'll discuss the feedback that's happened between the podcast and the next podcast. So very good point.
We want to continue this discussion and dialogue. I'll let you guys know where Paul and Chris are going and what ideas are being snatched up, just like this conversation, and working with you guys and finding solutions. So yeah, I just want to say thank you again, Paul. This podcast is supported by you, the viewer. Please consider supporting us in a variety of ways. You can subscribe to our Twitch channel. You can become a patron. You can also shop on Amazon using our affiliate link. And all those really do help us. Just want to say thank you for considering it. And of course, shout outs if you do use it. Thank you.
And you can find most of that stuff at our website at NoGutsNoGalaxy.net. Or you can find us on Twitch at NGNGTV, YouTube at NoGutsNoGalaxy TV, Twitter at NoGutsNoGalaxy, Facebook at NoGutsNoGalaxy Podcasts, and SoundCloud at NoGutsNoGalaxy.
This was your local No Guts, No Galaxy MechWarrior podcast. Signing off for tonight, this is Phil.
And this is Darren.
Until next time, Mech Warriors.
It'd be best if you avoid me, but I know you probably can't. You sense something is wrong with me. You can feel it on my skin, but there is more with it. Maybe I can be closer now, but I don't know how. Please help me remove my metal skin, my metal skin, my metal skin, and the wires within. You probably thought it was normal, just a little off. The truth is, at one time I was, but now I'm a robot. Forever